is Mr. Jones, and I'd like to help you with congruent triangles. Now remember, congruent triangles have three pairs of congruent corresponding sides and three pairs of congruent angles. Okay? In the diagram that's shown, let's see if we can determine whether or not those triangles are congruent, and then we need to justify the answer. Okay, so let's start with what we do know to be true. I see that side AB is congruent to side ED. Okay, they're both 3 units long, whatever those units are. Okay, and that's one pair of sides. I also see that BC is congruent to DC because they're both 4, so there's a second pair of corresponding sides. I don't know about the third side, AC and EC. However, I do see that angle B and angle D are right angles, meaning the triangles are right triangles, and I should be able to find the length of the hypotenuse. And I use Pythagoras, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, so 3 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. Now perhaps already you've learned some of the Pythagorean triplets, and you recognize when a right triangle has legs of 3 and 4, the hypotenuse will be 5. So in this case, c is equal to 5, and that means in both triangles the hypotenuse is going to be 5. Now you can go ahead and work out 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 9 plus 16 is 25. So c squared is equal to 25, and c is the square root of 25, or 5. Okay, but it's very helpful if you just learn some of those Pythagorean triplets. So I have all 3 pairs of sides congruent. I need to check the angles. Well, I see that the measure of angle B is equal to 90, and the measure of angle D is equal to 90, so let's switch colors here. The measure of angle B is equal to the measure of angle D. So there's one pair of corresponding angles. It looks like the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle E, or that simply angle A is congruent to angle E. So there's a second pair of angles. I don't have the third, but notice 2 things. First of all, those are vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. And secondly, if 2 angles in one triangle are congruent to 2 angles in a second, the third pair of angles must be congruent. Okay, so I can see that the measure of angle, let's call it PCA, is equal to the measure of angle E, let's go DCE. Okay, and so notice that all 3 pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, all 3 pairs of angles are equal, so the triangles must be congruent. Alright, why don't you see if you can name the congruents in the order in which they're congruent while I take a little break, and then when you have finished, hit continue. Of course, how the triangles are named congruent depends upon how you name the first triangle. Well, I'm going to do the obvious and begin with A, B, C. Okay, so triangle ABC is congruent to triangle. Well, remember, I need to find out what angle corresponds to angle A. So angle A corresponds to angle E, so triangle E. Angle B corresponds to D, so ED. And lastly, of course, the vertical angles correspond, so BCA corresponds to DCE. Okay, so we'll just finish with EDC. Okay, and there are the triangles that are congruent. Okay. Well, let's look at a second example then. In the pair of triangles that are shown here, see if you have enough information to show that they are congruent. If so, name the congruents and give your justification. Okay? And when you're ready, hit continue. Well, let's see. The answer that you should get is no. Can you show that they are congruent? Now, you may have shown, or you may have tried to show, but the truth is there's not enough information here. I do have parallel lines, and I know for parallel lines that alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so I have these pairs of angles congruent. I also have vertical angles in the center, and those are congruent. So I know that all three pairs of corresponding angles are congruent, but I do not know anything about the lengths of the sides. Even though it looks like the triangles are drawn so that they're congruent, notice that I can have the same illustration like so, where all of the corresponding angles, these sides are parallel, so all of the corresponding angles for the two triangles are congruent, but the triangles are obviously not the same size and therefore not congruent. Okay? So proving that the angles are congruent is not enough to prove that the triangles are congruent. I need to know about the lengths of the sides as well. Okay? Well, that should be a helpful overview on congruent triangles. And remember, it's very important when you name congruent triangles to